Mr. Ambassador, I want you to know that the Unity Coalition for Israel has long been a fan of your work as ambassador and minister for congressional affairs at Israel's embassy in Washington, and an internationally respected insider on U.S.-Israel relations, Mideast politics, and overseas investments in Israel's high-tech arena. We look forward to hearing your wisdom on U.S. investment in Israel as opposed to U.S. aid to Israel, and are excited about putting Israel in a positive light. This is a wonderful opportunity for you to expound on the topic. Please, Ambassador, give us your information and take as long as you wish with this. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you. I view it as a privilege to communicate with the Unity Coalition in general, but especially with Esther Levens, whom I have known for many, many years and highly respected, admired for your contribution to enhance U.S.-Israel relations. You have made a difference for which I'm grateful. When it comes to the reality of U.S.-Israel relations, there is conventional wisdom on one hand and the state of affairs on the other hand. The conventional wisdom is that the U.S. extends foreign aid to Israel, which is absolutely not the case. Certainly, the Jewish state is not foreign to the United States, which was established by the founding fathers who viewed themselves as the people of the modern-day covenant, and they followed in the footsteps of the early pilgrims who considered the newly found land to be the modern-day promised land. So the Jewish state is not foreign to the American ethos, to American history, American morality, and certainly we are not an entity that is looking for aid. We have been partners of the U.S., admittedly very much junior partner compared to the very senior partner, the U.S., but to understand the significance of the reality of U.S.-Israel relations, I would say that we're not talking about one-way street where the U.S. gives and Israel receives. This is increasingly a two-way street, mutually beneficial to the U.S. and Israel, with increasingly Israel transforming itself into a very unique producer of national security for the U.S. rather than a consumer of national security. And certainly, unlike other recipients of foreign aid, we are not a burden upon the U.S. budget or U.S. economy. We have been a very resourceful contributing asset to the U.S. budget and U.S. economy. And I'll share a few examples from my own personal experience. A number of years ago, I paid a visit to the Lockheed Martin plant in Fort Worth, Texas, which manufactures the F-16 combat plane and also recently started manufacturing the F-35 combat plane. The plant manager that took me around introduced me to a small team working on the plant, and he referred to them as the ace of the plant and asked him, why are they the ace? And he said, well, this is an Israeli team composed of Israeli Air Force men, and they're here 24/7. And their duty is to receive feedback from the Israeli Air Force as far as F-16 and now the F-35 used by the Israeli Air Force. And the feedback has to do with operation, maintenance, and repairs. And that feedback enhances the future generation of the F-16 and the F-35. I asked the plant manager how many upgrades of the current generation of the F-16 are attributed to the feedback from the Israeli Air Force, and the response was well over 600 modifications or upgrades. And he gave me examples: 50% of the cockpit result of Israeli feedback. 75% of the firing control outcome of Israeli feedback. And in fact, Israel has been all along the most unique tested of battle laboratory of the U.S. defense industry. When I asked the plant manager if he could quantify those 600 plus upgrades resulting from the Israeli feedback, if he could quantify it in terms of American dollars, his response was, and I quote, a mega billion-dollar bonanza to the manufacturer. I can assume logically that similar benefit is accrued by the manufacturer of the F-15, which we fly in Israel, F-15, manufactured by McDonnell Douglas, and once again, every day they receive Israeli feedback. There are hundreds, if not over 1,000, American military systems employed by Israel, and each one benefits from what I call services of the unique battle-tested laboratory, otherwise known as Israel. I paid a visit to the office of one of the congressmen from Tennessee, the Chattanooga district, and he told me that in his district there is a Northrop Grumman plant which manufactures special robots identifying explosives. A few years ago, Israel decided that robot would be best for Israel in its day-to-day battle against Arab terrorists, car bombs, etc., the improvised explosive devices. And the congressman told me, in the aftermath of the Israeli decision to buy that robot, there was a huge benefit to his district and the Northrop Grumman plant there, because the impact of the Israeli decision was identical to the impact of a AAA store joining a newly constructed shopping mall. Once a AAA store enters a shopping mall, more and more stores wish to come to the mall, and more customers come to frequent the stores in the mall. And he gave me example of the benefits to the plant, saying that every other week there is a telephone conference between the manufacturers and the users in Israel. The users provide feedback to the manufacturers in Northrop Grumman, and that is equivalent, according to the congressman, equivalent to anywhere between 10 and 15 years of research and development, which are provided free of charge by Israel. And that benefit of Israeli feedback has enhanced the competitiveness of that particular robot in the global competition, which further increased exports out of the Chattanooga district, and that has obviously expanded the employment base of the district in Tennessee. One can move to a totally different area, and that is day-to-day military operation. Fort Leavenworth, Kansas is the intellectual mecca of the U.S. military, and as I was told by a former commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps who was involved in battle tactic formulation, that which is formulated as far as battle tactics in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, is based on the Israeli experience. They study Israel wars and they apply it to future challenges which will be faced by the U.S. One such challenge has to do with battle tactics. And during one of my visits to Alabama, I met a major who serves in Alabama. He's a specialist in urban warfare. And this specialist major told me that on their base, there is a model which is the platform of training for the urban warfare specialized soldiers. And he's saying that model was built by the Israeli Defense Forces as a result of Israel's experience in urban warfare in Lebanon, the West Bank, and in Gaza. And once a year, that major joins other urban warfare specialists of the U.S. military forces, and they fly to Israel to get training and updates. on the latest of the Israeli lessons as far as urban warfare is concerned. An experience which is much, much more critical has to do with threat of nuclear war. Going back to 1991, the first Gulf War, there was a major event of the defense establishment in Washington in the aftermath of the first Gulf War, and keynote speaker back then in 91 was Dick Cheney, who was at that time the defense secretary under George Bush Sr. The first sentence uttered by Dick Cheney was, "Thank you, Israel, for bombing Iraq's nuclear reactor in 1981, which spared us in the U.S. a nuclear confrontation in 1991. Now, how does one assess such a contribution, which, by the way, was provided by an Israeli bombing of the Iraqi nuclear reactor in defiance of a most egregious, most brutal American pressure to refrain from that bombing? And if one goes back to the chronicles of 1981, Israel was severely punished by the U.S. for bombing the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981. Well, sometimes it takes more than few months, more than few years for leaders to realize the Israeli contribution, and Dick Cheney's statement made clear that finally the U.S. realized the depth and the extent of the Israeli contribution by bombing the Iraqi nuclear reactor. In 2007, Israel bombed and destroyed the Syrian nuclear reactor. Can one imagine the face of Syria with nuclear capability in the hands of either Assad or Hezbollah or ISIS or the Iranians, all of which was spared by an Israeli action? I can go on and on and on, but to give it in a more personal example, I spoke about that issue 2 years ago in Dallas, Texas. It was a major Christian conference of 400 participants, and at the end of my presentation on what has Israel done lately for the U.S., some people came over to share with me their feedback. One of them was a retired combat pilot, and he said, "Mr. Ettinger, I would like to add another item to your inventory of Israeli contributions to the United States." And he said, as a retired combat pilot, I can tell you that the most beneficial time for American pilots is joint maneuvers with the Israeli Air Force. And my response to him was that I love hearing that, but I have difficulties accepting it because, after all, Israel is using American hardware. And certainly the IQ of Israeli pilots is not higher, maybe lower than the IQ of American pilots. Why would American pilots benefit so much through joint maneuvers with the Israeli Air Force? And the response by the retired American combat pilot was, well, the Israeli pilots always fly, training or operationally, under do or die state of mind, which we in America rarely experience. Whether it's training or operation, Israeli pilots are always within enemy radar and within enemy's surface-to-air missile. And therefore, you have to fly more audaciously and more creatively, which Americans rarely, if at all, experience. And the only time, he said, for American pilots to realize how more audacious and more creative they can become is when they train with Israeli pilots that do fly with American hardware, but through that do-or-die state of mind, they stretch the capabilities of the American hardware to a much, much larger distance than is done daily by American pilots. Last and not least, I'll refer to the late General Alexander Haig. I was told by his chief of staff that Alexander Haig was known to be one of the most excited supporters of expanded, enhanced U.S.-Israel strategic cooperation. Whenever he was asked, General, how come you're so excited about joining forces with Israel? General Haig formulated a standard response, which was as follows: Israel constitutes the largest American aircraft carrier, which does not require a single American on board, which is deployed in the most critical area for regional and global stability as well as American interest, which is an unconditional ally of the U.S. and can never be signed. And if there would not be an Israel in the western flank of the Middle East or the eastern flank of the Mediterranean, then the U.S., for its own interest, would have to deploy more military divisions to the Middle East, more real aircraft carriers to the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, all of which is spared by one Jewish state. And according to the late General Alexander Haig, the benefit to the U.S. or the saving to the U.S. defense budget was anywhere between $15 to $20 billion every single year. That by itself is roughly 600-700% annual rate of return on what is misperceived as foreign aid to Israel, which in fact is an investment in Israel yielding the U.S. taxpayer unique level of rate of return. And I haven't discussed yet what is Israel doing as far as intelligence for the U.S. Former head of the Air Force Intelligence, General George Keegan, who was also a major supporter of expanded cooperation with Israel, used to refer to Israel as the country of 5 CIAs, because according to George Keegan, the scope of intelligence shared by Israel with the U.S., and especially when it comes to Islamic terrorism, equals what would be produced by 5 CIAs. What's the dollar sign next to such a contribution? And again, there's no doubt, Israel is by far the junior partner, but we are partner with the U.S. We are not a needy entity looking for foreign aid. And as I said before, we are involved in a very busy, highly mutually productive two-way street rather than one-way street. That's my my sermon on the subject, again, subject to your own questions, criticism, whatever.
I'm really so elated that the U.S. is recognizing Israel as such a wonderful partner. Such an articulate statement of how they have literally helped the United States. Thank you so much for...
Well, you can take one example before we sign off. In 2018, the U.S. is rightly very concerned about the survival of its Arab allies in Saudi Arabia, in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Oman, certainly Jordan and Egypt. All the regimes in those countries could experience very tenuous reality, and you never know in the unpredictable, violent Middle East, how long will they last? The fact is that the U.S. is limited in its ability to extend support to those regimes, and Israel has collaborated with the U.S. in bolstering those regimes. As a result, we have seen unprecedented strategic contacts between Saudi Arabia and Israel, between Kuwait and Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and Israel, between Jordan and Israel, etc. And by the way, the enhancement of bilateral relation between Israel and every one of the pro-Arab countries goes on and is expanded irrespective of the Palestinian issue, which does not concern so much those Arab regimes, contrary again to the Arab talk. When it comes to Arab work, they value relations with the U.S. and Israel much more than the Palestinian issue. And here again, it's Israel on the scene in a critical area, making sure that friendly pro-U.S. regimes in Amman, Jordan, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, in Cairo, Egypt, in Kuwait City, Kuwait, etc., are with us rather than replaced by anti-American radical forces which would make the threat of Islamic terrorism to the U.S. that much closer home, and all of which is averted by the collaboration between U.S. and Israel. And again, Israel, the junior partner, U.S. by far the senior partner.
I'm so grateful for your wonderful interview, and we wish you just nothing but good health and success. And let's continue to pick your brain, as you will. I appreciate it so very much. Thank you.
I consider it a privilege, and let me know at any time. Thank you for everything you have done through the Unity Coalition and on a personal level. Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome.